So I'll read the wording for the resolution. Avoid food waste, address food poverty. The WI calls on all supermarkets to sign up to a voluntary agreement to avoid food waste, thereby passing surplus food on to charities, thus helping to address the issue of increasing food poverty in the UK. The resolution will be now proposed and seconded, and I asked Anne Yellis, member of Snailbeach WI Shropshire Federation, to... I'm going to have to put a stop to this, it's getting a bit silly. Anne, would you kindly come and propose a resolution? Thank you.
Madam Chair, gentlemen, ladies of the WI, good afternoon. Food waste is a huge problem. It is estimated that approximately 200,000 tonnes of food is thrown away annually by supermarkets, with only around 2% of edible surplus food currently being collected in the UK and redistributed. This has a social and environmental effect. In the UK, 5.8 million people are currently thought to live in deep poverty, meaning that they struggle to afford everyday essentials and may increasingly rely on food banks and charities to supply their food. However, food can be wasted when produce is rejected by supermarkets because it doesn't meet appearance guidelines or due to fluctuations leading to oversupply. This can have a huge impact on farmers' livelihoods. The environmental effects include the wasted resources of food production, water, land use, labour, fertilisers, transport, as well as the cost of actually managing food waste. Currently, instead of surplus food being used to feed people, many food manufacturers, processors and suppliers dispose of that food via anaerobic digestion or provide it as animal feed. This needs to change. The UN states that cutting food waste by 1/4 would mean enough food to feed all the people who are malnourished. Homeless hostels, breakfast clubs, day centres for older people, women's refuges, as well as individuals and families in receipt of food vouchers via food banks, all can benefit when food is passed on to charities and community groups. Some supermarkets are already working with partners to make use of this surplus food, but not all. In fact, much more needs to be done. This resolution calls on all supermarkets to sign up to a voluntary agreement to address food waste and pass surplus food on to charities. Supermarkets must establish processes that will ensure their surplus food is identified as early as possible. Redistributing this food means it can be made available to charities and make a difference to many people's lives. I urge you to vote for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Our first expert speaker is Tristram Stewart, founder of Feedback, who will speak in support of the resolution. Please welcome Tristram Stewart.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies. I remember the first time I was put up against the British Retail Consortium to debate the issue of food waste and donations of surplus to charities back in 2002. At that time, the donations from supermarkets were at best tokenistic, and yet the British Retail Consortium pushed the argument again and again that the supermarkets were doing everything that they could, that most food waste was occurring in households, and therefore to campaign on supermarkets was to miss the point. We were supposed to be grateful to the supermarkets for dropping a few crumbs into the charitable sector. My goodness, the landscape has changed. It is now regarded widely as a moral necessity, an obligation, that corporations who, for years, have held on to surplus food and withheld it from organizations that can feed hungry people with it, and instead of doing that obviously commonsensical, positive thing with that good quality food that has huge value for some people, they were destroying it. Calling out corporations for this ineptitude at best and moral turpitude, as I would call it, is natural and it is right, just as it would be to call out the obnoxiousness of somebody who threw food out of a window in a room with hungry people in it. It makes sense, and we have them on the run. The supermarkets have now woken up to the fact that food waste on this scale, in a context of both hunger in the UK and also globally, is totally unacceptable. And yet, however way you cut it, only a small fraction of the perfectly edible surplus food that is being wasted both by supermarkets in their stores, in their distribution depots, and most importantly, in the factories and on the farms of their suppliers, the vast majority of that food, good quality food, is still being wasted. We've heard a lot about what they're doing to manage that waste better, sending it off for incineration to make energy, for composting to make soil enrichment compost, for anaerobic digestion, which, depending on what food you put into it, recovers up to 1% of the energy that went into growing the food. It recovers none of the land, none of the water, none of the biodiversity impacts. It recovers none of the food that could be used to feed hungry people. We've had enough of hearing about these palliating food waste management options that, of course, are better than landfill, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons, hundreds of millions of good quality, nutritious meals being turned back into muck from which they came. And these figures, 270,000 tons is the latest estimate of edible food waste that the supermarkets could get a handle on, doesn't touch the millions of tons of perfectly good fruit and vegetables that I see being wasted on farms across the country because, as we've heard, they're the wrong shape or size, or because an order was cancelled at the last minute. The supermarkets, along with many of the manufacturers in this country, did sign something called the Court Hold Commitment, the latest iteration of which binds the signatories and the industry as a whole to a reduction of food waste by 20% by 2025. That is something. It's good. It's progress. But this is still incremental, 20% by 2025. It's not enough. They're still dragging their feet. Supermarkets can go much further, and indeed, if Court Hold was enough, why have we seen, just in the last few months, supermarkets falling over themselves in the wake of campaigns by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall on BBC One, by Jamie Oliver on Channel 4, touching this issue? Why have we seen them coming out with commitments of their own? Tesco, for example, through the Food Cloud Fair Share app, has now committed to redistributing all of the good quality food in their stores and in their distribution points. This shows that a commitment to use all of the food in our stores and in our supply chains for its proper purpose is possible, and we want to see all of the supermarkets come out with this kind of commitment. Not just their own stores, but the supermarkets are the principal target for this kind of campaign because they are the power brokers in the supply chain. If they require their manufacturers, if they allow their farmers to donate surplus food, if they encourage this, those suppliers will listen. They have the power to influence vastly more food than what is actually in their stores themselves. Many of you will have heard about the new laws that were passed, well, first in Belgium and then most famously recently in France, obliging supermarkets to have relationships with charities to take their surplus food. We've seen a petition started by somebody here in Brighton, in fact, which received 280,000 signatures on 38 Degrees, the online petition organization website. 280,000 people signed that for a UK law with equivalence to the one in France. My own organization launched a petition with similar aims and wider ones, which picked up 1 million petitions in less than a week. It shows that there is public appetite, public demand for this kind of change. But legislation is not the only means by which we can implement this kind of change. Indeed, the UK government seems not to be minded to go in this direction at this present point. And that is why a public campaign run by civic society organizations such as the WI, and including the many others who will join forces and join the voice to the WI if you pass this resolution today, the public pressure to call those supermarkets who we give our money to every day to account, to align with the principles that I believe everyone in this room, everyone in this country adheres to, which is that good quality food should not be going to waste in the context of hunger on the same streets. Getting voluntary commitments, as this resolution suggests, will not only have an immediate impact for publicly accountable behavior and practice change on the part of the supermarkets, but if legislation is the long-term goal, that kind of commitment will create the enabling environment in which such legislation can be passed. You've seen it yourselves in your own history, the plastic bag campaign, which started with a voluntary agreement and ended up in legislation. In my own campaigning lifetime, we had exactly the same bun fight with the supermarkets over what is now called the Groceries Code Adjudicator. This is the adjudicator that steps in when supermarkets cancel an order at the last minute or amend their forecasts, such that farmers who have grown food can't sell it, can't even give it away. The adjudicator, this was a law passed in 2013, can now fine supermarkets up to 1% of their turnover for violations of a code of practice. That started with a voluntary code, and it became legislation. And therefore, if legislation is your objective, this resolution is the one to go for now. Indeed, the laws that we've seen in France and Belgium have a relatively narrow remit. For the WI, campaigning on this issue would open up the scope to campaign not just on what happens in your local stores, but what happens in the supply chains across the stores. Indeed, I would argue that the WI is uniquely placed to conduct this campaign. With members across the rural communities of the United Kingdom, you can galvanize rural communities, urban communities. You can make this a national issue which concerns everyone. And as importantly, to expose the true nature of the system that we're up against, namely one that is run for profit at the expense of the environment and indeed sometimes public health, rather than one designed to feed people. Food waste is not just revolting, it's an issue that connects people to their supply chains and can be the first step of revolt against an unjust and environmentally destructive system. Thank you very much.
Our second expert speaker is Alice Ellison, Environment Policy Advisor for British Retail Consortium, and she will set out some points to consider against the resolution. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to speak about food waste. I'm Alice, Head of Environment Policy for the British Retail Consortium, the lead trade association representing retailers, including major supermarkets. I'll be speaking against the resolution, not because I disagree with its aims, but because what the resolution is calling for is already happening. Food waste and what happens to surplus food has become much more important to everyone over the last few years. It's a serious problem with environmental as well as social and economic consequences. The most comprehensive source of data on food waste in the UK is WRAP, an independent expert charity focusing on resource efficiency. WRAP estimates that post-farm gate annual food waste in the UK is around 10 million tonnes, the majority of which could have been avoided. Its most recent report confirms that retail makes up just 2% of this, with household waste accounting for a startling 70%. However, the amount of food wasted by retailers, while the amount of food wasted by retailers is relatively small compared to what is being wasted in the supply chain and at home, as we've heard, retailers have a huge role to play in influencing the amount of food waste in the supply chain and at home. But a focus solely on retail food waste will ignore 98% of post-farm gate food waste in the UK. The problem can only be solved if everyone plays their part. And UK retailers are already using their position at the heart of the food chain to work with their suppliers and customers to reduce the nation's food waste. For example, since 2009, UK grocery retailers have signed up to voluntary targets to reduce household food waste and have helped customers reduce food wasted in their homes by 15% over a 5-year period. Some of the things I've noticed personally when shopping and cooking over the past few years are much more advice on pack about how best to store food and how to use and store leftovers. Packaging has become much more streamlined and innovative in order to keep food fresher for longer and easier to reseal once opened. And several products now come in a variety of portion sizes so we can purchase the amount we need. Supermarkets are also working with farmers to tackle food waste and losses in agriculture, making most of the entire crop in the field or more of the carcass of animals. Other measures do include promoting wonky fruit and veg, smarter forecasting, and reviewing storage and transport arrangements. And retailers are addressing their own food waste too. They exist to provide fresh, quality food at the best price to all of their customers and to prevent food waste from occurring in the first place. Reducing food waste makes commercial sense and is the best way to reduce a business's environmental impact. Food waste arises in retail stores and depots for a variety of reasons, such as products going out of date, recalls, breakages, damages, and food being left out of the fridge or freezer for too long. In order to drive down waste in their own operations, retailers are working to forecast better, package better, increase shelf life, and promote products close to the end of life. The aim is that more food will go to customers rather than being wasted or redistributed. However, retailers do have usable excess stock, and they work with charities, manufacturers, and redistribution organisations across the UK to make sure as much as possible goes to people who need it. Today's resolution states that just 2% of edible surplus food is being collected and redistributed for human consumption. Since this resolution was tabled, WRAP has published research showing that almost 20% of edible surplus food was redistributed by UK food retailers and manufacturers last year. However, whatever the percentage, there clearly is a lot more to be done. Retailers are rising to the challenge, and having made huge strides in recent years in redistributing surplus food from their depots, they're now focusing on ways to overcome the logistical challenges around redistribution from their stores. And these are challenges such as goods arising across a large number of sites, limited remaining shelf life, and the need to match the amounts and types of surplus with the needs and capabilities of charities in any given local area. A number of new initiatives and pilots, often using IT systems, seeking to overcome these systems have been announced in the last 12 months, and these will form the building blocks of a strategy to increase the amount of surplus food that can be redistributed from stores. Ultimately, though, any specific target for redistribution will likely incentivise increased redistribution over preventing waste in the first place. Crucially, we also need to recognise that food waste and food poverty are two different issues. Retailers all agree that food poverty is concerning and are working to mitigate this in different ways. They stock value ranges, they keep their prices low, they offer promotions, they have daily reduced to clear sections and support food banks locally and nationally with food and cash donations. And while a redistribution of surplus food by retailers does help to alleviate food poverty, it is not a solution to hunger in the UK. There are many issues that need to be addressed to tackle the underlying causes of poverty, and a system based on food surplus generated by retailers will not address them. And retailers are actually looking to reduce food waste and food surplus in the first place, so redistribution should not be seen as a long-term measure to reduce food poverty. However, we currently have both food poverty and food surpluses, and it makes complete sense for retailers to step up and make sure that their usable excess stock goes to charities and redistribution organisations across the UK. Ultimately, though, this resolution has preempted actual events, And since it was drafted, as we've already heard, RAP has announced a new Court Hold 2025 initiative, a voluntary agreement involving RAP, also the 4 UK governments and the food industry, which aims to reduce food waste across the board, so from farm to fork, by 20% over the next decade. And retail is the sector best represented in that agreement, so 93% of the grocery sector has signed up to the initiative. And it follows a series of earlier voluntary initiatives which have already contributed to significant reductions in food waste. And this agreement has brought businesses together on a voluntary basis to set challenging but achievable goals, and it will do more to tackle food waste wherever it occurs than could a target imposed on any one part of the food supply chain. Retailers recognise there's more to be done on reducing food waste and redistributing surplus food, and that's why they've signed up to this voluntary agreement, to cut food waste across the board. Also, if we only focus on direct waste from retail, we will not address 98% of the UK's post-farm gate waste. There's a much bigger picture which the WI is in a great position to address. We must recognise that our primary goal should be to avoid overproduction in the first place, which is why the redistribution of food is not a long-term solution to food poverty, but will help to alleviate it. On this basis, though I acknowledge the laudable aims of the motion, it cannot fundamentally address food waste better than the steps already being taken by the food industry.
Thank you, Alice. I'll now take some points from the floor, and the stewards holding up the flags to indicate which microphones are being used. And remember, no more than 2 minutes. Is there anybody at number 1? Yes?
My name's Jo Thompson from Suffolk East. I think we've got the wrong emphasis. We're an educational institution. That's one of our aims. We should be teaching people to cook. If you don't teach those people to cook, you can give them all the food in the food banks. They don't know what to do with it. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Microphone number 2.
My name is Julie Geeter. I'm Leyston, WI, Suffolk East. I grow our own vegetables in my own garden, and I cannot say what shape they are. I cook them, but they're no different to a perfectly shaped piece of food. Why do they throw it away? Why can't they sell it cheaply so the people who cannot afford perfect food be able to buy it? It's such a waste, and they're just as nutritious as a perfect piece of food. Why? And I'm very cross that they do throw it away, and the farmers pay the penalty because they have to dispose of wonky food because the supermarkets won't take them. Thank you.
Is there someone at number 3? Yes.
Yes, my name is Jane Cameron. I'm from Brookside WI in the Nottinghamshire Federation. My husband is a cookery teacher. He is the only cookery teacher in his school. I do believe for the thing against food waste, but I also believe that we should start getting more cookery teachers in our school to help our children. Thank you.
Number 4.
Hello, my name's Katie Ordas. I'm from Cottonopolis WI in Lancashire Federation. 2 years ago, I would open my fridge and there was nothing in it. Honestly, there was nothing. I could ring my mum and say, can I come round for tea? And that's me being lucky. I walked to my committee meeting on Wednesday and we'll pass 5 people on the streets in a 3-minute walk in central Manchester. We're a first world nation. We shouldn't have people not having food. We're nearly 250,000 people in our institution. We should be able to help. We should start making a difference with this resolution and start helping people to eat. It's not a difficult thing. People need to eat. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 5.
My name is Carol James from Great and Little Leeds WI Essex Federation. Thank you, ladies. I work for the Trussell Trust, who provide food banks throughout the country. One of the things we don't accept at food banks is fresh food. We take tinned and packet goods to redistribute. That's done because of logistics. We can't take fresh food. And this resolution is addressing, I believe, fresh food. And that should go to charities. That should go to those who provide meals for those that haven't got the resources to provide it themselves. But I would address this to the proposer and seconder. Food banks are not in that category. We do not take fresh food.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Number 6.
Valerie Tustin-Smith of Rudford, High Leaden and Churcham WI. I've been asked by Rudford to ask the question really about food distribution centres, because we understand here there is an even greater waste than there is in the supermarkets.
I can't answer that question. Tristan might be able to. Can you come up? And Alice as well. Would you like to both come up and then perhaps you can answer the question for the lady?
Very useful point of clarity. Food bank is used in the United Kingdom in a slightly different way from the rest of Europe. There are organisations, indeed Lindsay Boswell, the CEO of FareShare, is here today, I'm very pleased to say. His organisation runs a national network of distribution points that collects fresh surplus food and tin goods and all other goods and distributes it to thousands of community centres around the country that provide a range of services, not just food, all sorts of different educational, welfare, community support organisations benefit from the food that FareShare is able to bring them, and he has thousands of organisations waiting for more food. The stoppage point is supply, and that is why this resolution is so well targeted. And I would say that, have I answered that question? Yeah?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Good.
Alice?
If I haven't answered it, what was the specific point that was?
I think I might have it. Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Can Alice have a word in edgeways?
Okay, I'm not sure what you meant by redistribution centres. I don't know if you meant redistribution or if you meant distribution centres for supermarkets.
Yes.
If you meant distribution centres for supermarkets, then actually many major retailers have actually resolved the logistics from distribution centres, and that's much easier to redistribute from. And now they're looking at redistributing from the store, which is much harder because the volumes are scattered all over the place and much smaller and harder to predict. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Answered the question.
Thank you. The lady's happy. Thank you. Is there anybody at number 7? No? Back to number 1 then.
Thank you. No. Yep. Sophie Nelson, Shelswell WI, Oxfordshire Federation. They don't cheer for me. Thanks. No, that was a pity cheer. I just want to clarify a point that I think that some people who are against the motion don't quite understand, and that is that supermarkets are not at the end of the chain. It's not even the consumer that's at the end of the chain. Supermarkets are at the beginning of the chain. I think it was a really important point that was raised about the balance of power. Supermarkets play a part in our daily lives, and therefore they have a responsibility to tackle what happens every day. People go hungry. The second speaker said that there were two separate issues, but as a school teacher, as someone who lives in an agricultural area, they're really not. Supermarkets do not have a charitable or humanitarian aims at their hearts. Food waste does not cost the supermarkets the same way that it costs farmers, suppliers, or those in need. The WI has an opportunity today to set in motion an action that will force retailers to reassess systems and the way in which they, like us, can take responsibility for their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2.
Hi, I'm Carol Lenton from Friston WI in Lincolnshire, North Lincolnshire, and I'd just like to say that I'm a primary school teacher as well, and since 2014, the curriculum, we've been teaching in part of our DT cooking lessons, so I disagree with the lady who said that cooking wasn't going into school, because it definitely is. What is that? I'm in a farming community, and I often get donations from farmers to help me in my teaching. I never get any donations from supermarkets yet. I do ask them, so...
Number 3. Is anybody at number 3?
Zdenka
Yes.
Hendrick, Avon Federation. KFC, thank you. KFC, Burger King, McDonald's. At the end of each day, all the cooked food that could be given to people who are hungry is binned. How can we resolve that?
I don't know the answer to that one. Number 4, is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? I feel... Number 5.
Oh my goodness me. Claire Farquhar, Leicester and Rutland Federation. Thank you, ladies. I'm doing an Anna. I've been in the WI for 5 years. I am the president of Market Harborough. I've been there for 2 years. I'm sorry, ladies, I know that a lot of you have been in this organisation for a very, very long time, but I'm finding this really, really aggravating. I don't like the wording of this resolution. I'm not actually sure I particularly like the way that we dealt with the previous resolution.
Actually,
because it
could
was...
you actually make a point of asking the question you want to ask about the resolution?
I disagree with... I work in a school. We don't teach food education. We need to relook at the way we word resolutions, because are we trying to deal with food poverty, or are we trying to deal with waste? Because if we're dealing with waste, then the waste that we've already been told that 70% of the waste is happening in the home, and I believe that the WI is definitely, we should be fighting to educate and to reduce waste
My
in home.
apologies for interrupting, but that is actually probably not relevant to what we're asking.
But unfortunately it is, and that's how people feel. And Madam Chairman, I'm really sorry, but I'm sitting there and everybody is saying the same thing, and if I'm speaking out of turn, I apologise, but I am listening to what everybody else is saying around me and within our WIs, and this is not the way we should be voting or dealing with resolutions. But if I'm the only brave one to stand up and say, then that's what I've got to do.
I mean, I think what I would say is that for many, many years we've been dealing with food issues within the WI and worked with RAP and lots of other organisations. And this is the one that has come to the fore now. If you go back and you look at keeping yourselves informed in the other resolutions, you'll find there's a lot of other mandates that you could work on to help look at food waste. So, I think we've got to look at what we've got today. And I think last one, please, number 6.
Okay. Val Harrison, Quinton WI, West Midlands Federation. We can start, all of us, every member of the WI, with our local supermarkets. Go and ask the manager how much food is wasted, what percentage of food is wasted in his supermarket or her supermarket every week. And then if you don't like the answer, don't shop there. Tell them that you're going to go and shop somewhere else. And while you're at it, remind the government exactly how much dependency there is on food and the need for food not to be wasted. Our synagogue, every time somebody makes a donation to a food bank, for example, they fill in a postcard which once a month goes to 10 Downing Street to remind the Prime Minister how much food is needed in this country. He's given up replying to us.
Thank you. Right, I think we'll close there. We've run out of time yet again. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Baroness de Souza. Baroness de Souza studied anthropology at the University College London. After graduating in 1970, she studied for her Doctor of Philosophy at Lady Margaret Hall, University of Oxford. She taught anthropology at both London School of Economics and the Oxford Brookes University. Baroness de Souza is married to Dr. Stanislas de Souza, and they have 2 children, and their eldest daughter is the journalist Christia de Souza. She entered the House of Lords in 2004, and in 2011 was elected Lord Speaker of the House of Lords and began a new role in September of that year. Baroness de Souza has a special interest in human rights and development issues. She was a director and consultant for the Redress Trust and also a trustee at a range of human rights and development organisations. Baroness de Souza was the director of an independent research group focusing on development and emergency aid and has researched the economic origins and alleviation of famine. In her previous career, Baroness de Souza lived and worked in Southern Europe, Africa, Asia and Oceania. And she has also said that she'd be willing to take questions at the end of the session. So please, would you welcome Baroness de Souza of Wychwood in the county of Oxfordshire.
Thank you very much indeed for your welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honoured and delighted to have been invited to speak in this, the 101st year of your existence. We have, in the House of Lords, over the years forged good links between our 2 organisations. A guest speaker from the House of Lords visited the Leicestershire and Rutland Women's Institute in March, and we're planning further visits to the Isle of Ely and to Cornwall. It seems that we enjoy one another's company. There are 2 distinct parts to my talk here today. The first is to argue the importance of the House of Lords in the legislative process, and the second, to suggest that its present composition is not ideal for the House to fulfil its purpose. So, what is the House of Lords? Who is in it? What's it for? A surprising number of even constitutionally literate people have very little idea. And yet, if the House of Lords were to disappear tomorrow, it would most probably have to be reinvented the next day. It plays a vital role in revising and scrutinising draft legislation before becoming the law of the land and affecting all of us. One of my colleagues, Michael Dobbs, put it best in a recent interview, and I quote, "The Lords," he said, "are really parliamentary worms. We take all this rubbish that comes from the Commons and it disappears inside the House of Lords in darkness because nobody knows what it is that we do, and it reappears 6 months later. It might not be perfect, but it's always more fragrant and more fertile than what went in." Very simply, the government of the day devises laws which are then drafted and debated in the House of Commons, the elected House. But major problems begin to arise. The Commons has to deal with an avalanche of draft laws or bills, especially at the beginning of a new administration following a general election. Governments of whatever colour come into office full of zeal to make the world a better place and to make their mark on history. This too often gives rise to a sudden rush of ill-thought-through, contradictory and poorly drafted clauses to bills. MPs are allocated a certain amount of time for each bill. When they reach the end of the allotted time, that's it. There's no further opportunity to change draft laws. The risk, therefore, is that unrevised bills would become the law for the courts to impose, often to the disadvantage, even to the detriment of all of us. However, this draft legislation then comes to the Lords, who have no time limit to their deliberations. It takes as long as it takes to revise pages and pages of often complex bills, technically, morally, and ethically. And this is the main function of the Lords, to revise and to scrutinise line by line, and in so doing hold the government to account. The Lords do this in various ways, but usually at the committee stage, where amendments to bills are tabled and then voted on. You might ask, what justification is there for this unelected group of aged people to adjudicate on legislation? And, it's a good question. I'll try to answer it briefly. Since the Life Peerages Act of 1958, people who have achieved distinction in their professional fields have been appointed to the House of Lords. Today, you can find renowned experts in just about any field you can think of: medicine, science, law, philosophy, education, welfare, architecture, climate change, the built environment, crime, the arts. The list just goes on and on. Even those who've retired from their professions maintain frequent contact through professional associations and through membership of civic society organisations that promote their particular interests or causes. For example, one peer, who was formerly Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons, is an active member of almost all those voluntary and campaign groups that have anything to do with prison conditions, rehabilitation, sentencing, or youth offending. His views are deeply respected by his fellow peers, but also by the government of the day, because he speaks from a wealth of experience rather than as a party political affiliate. Another example concerns legislation governing stem cell research and the use of 14-day-old embryos, a matter you will, I think, agree, raises many and deep religious, ethical, and scientific implications. The Lords debated and argued the draft bill for days. Many of those who spoke in favour of maintaining the UK's preeminent world position in the field of regenerative medicine were themselves practitioners, lending scientific and not just political weight to the debate. For example, Robert Winston was one of the people who argued for stem cell research, and again, he is a respected embryologist. They argued that the only way to develop measures to counteract inherited conditions was by using stem cell research, and won the day. Certainly, by force of argument, supported by the expertise that many of those who spoke held. There are many, many examples of this kind of intervention made by the Lords that ensure a bill leaves the Lords in a very different form from the one in which it arrived. In the parliamentary year 2014 to 15, the Lords tabled 3,217 amendments, of which 1,213 were agreed and many more accepted in principle by the government. In more recent times, it is the Lords that have insisted that the government think again on imposing child and working tax credits, on accepting some of the 3,000 unaccompanied children languishing in refugee camps in France, on a commitment to increase social housing, on minimising the impact of the so-called bedroom tax, on maintaining a degree of legal aid, on the tampon tax, on disabled children having the right to attend mainstream schools, and on funding for political parties. The Lords is more driven by issues than it is by party politics, although, of course, party politics play a part. So what happens when the Lords, which does not, in normal circumstances, have a veto, objects to elements of legislation and sends an amended bill back to the elected Commons for agreement? The Commons can do one of three things. It can accept the Lords' changes, it can reject them, or it can rephrase or put into its own words the changes sought by the Lords. What happens if the Lords are so adamant that they dig their heels in on a particular clause? It can and has happened, most especially on issues to do with civil and individual liberties. For example, not increasing the number of days any suspect can be held in detention before being charged. Well, we then go into a process which is called ping-pong, for obvious reasons, back and forth between the houses until a compromise is reached, which it usually is. Sometimes this can take a long time. In 2006, the Lords sat continuously for nearly 40 hours while considering a bill, and a compromise was reached which was very close to what the Lords was insisting on anyhow. Ultimately, however, the government of the day must have its way in the elected chamber. This is particularly accepted if the legislation is a so-called manifesto bill, meaning one that was promoted on the platform of the winning side in a general election. If, and this is really rare, the Lords absolutely insists on its changes, the government can invoke the Parliament Acts, legislation that goes back to 1911, when the Lords objected to Lloyd George's People's Budget. It simply means that the government can override Lords' objections and enact legislation to which the Lords has not given its agreement, albeit the law will be delayed for up to a year. This has happened only 7 times since 1911, and most recently in 2004 to insist on banning hunting with dogs. Let me summarise very briefly. The Lords has a distinct and important role in revising and scrutinising legislation and holding the government to account. It also plays an equally important role in its select committee work, producing reports that influence government policies and are widely respected throughout the world. We too, for example, have looked at the issue of food waste, which you are voting on as we speak, and we made recommendations to give far greater emphasis to the distribution of surplus food via food banks and charities. Lords has also, in the last 2 years, produced intensively and extensively researched reports on subjects such as affordable childcare, the Arctic, extradition laws, sexual violence as a weapon of war, social mobility, the built environment, as well as a host of scientific reports, which are very influential, on alternative energy, climate change, immunization, HIV, AIDS, pandemics, and such like subjects. We know that although the age profile of the Lords is embarrassingly high, but coming down, there is a pool of wisdom. Diversity, too, is increasing. 26% of members are women. No, not enough, but better than the 17%, which was the case when I arrived in 2004. All 9 major religions are represented, as are ethnic and minority groups. So, dear friends, what's to criticise? The Lords are doing a great job, and many small changes to procedure and practice over the years taken together mean that the Lords is by no means unreformed. Dear colleagues, I have to tell you that all is not well in the House of Lords, in your Lordship's House. The House is far larger than it needs to be to fulfil its role, increasing the burden to the administration and to the taxpayer. Peers are sometimes appointed for reasons other than their expertise or indeed willingness to contribute to the work of the second chamber. An increasing number of former MPs are being appointed, which shifts the balance towards a more politicised House. The hereditary principle still operates, albeit to a much reduced degree. The House, as presently constituted, does not represent the party balance as shown in recent elections. These factors have, to my mind, contributed greatly to a downturn in the reputation of the House and indeed to its effective working. Let's look briefly at the implications of some of these factors. The size of the House. I am almost too embarrassed to tell you that we currently have well over 800 members. The only larger chamber in the world is the Chinese National Congress, which is not really a parliamentary body at all. How has this happened and why? Very simply because there is no, nor ever has been, any cap on the size of the Lords, appointments to which remain in the patronage of the Prime Minister of the day. In the last year, out of 64 appointments to the House, only 4 have been crossbenchers or independents with no affiliation to a political party, proposed by the Independent Appointments Commission. In contrast, 56 appointments have been party political. While some of those appointed are clear contributors to the work of the Lords, too many are not. In fact, in one or two cases, those appointed decline to make any contribution other than voting due to the fact that they are still acting as special advisors to the government. A careful analysis of attendance, voting, and contributions to debates, oral questions, and committees indicates that the Lords, a full-time chamber with part-time members, could very comfortably carry out its work with no loss of expertise or diminution in the close scrutiny of legislation, with between 450 to 500 members. The total cost of members' allowances and travels per year is around 20 million. So I have to tell you that the House of Commons is 5 times that amount, so please don't be too shocked. But anyhow, reducing the size of the House by about 250 members would represent a significant saving to the taxpayer. Other advantages of a more rational and less politically driven recruitment process could include more time for substantial debates, more sustained questioning of government policies, and perhaps a change in the perception of an overstuffed and unnecessary second chamber. A further difficulty is the hereditary principle. Those hereditaries who remain in the House are valuable contributors, one must say, and offer in some cases exceptional expertise. However, the principle surely should not continue in the 21st century. The 1999 House of Lords Act under the Tony Blair administration got rid of the majority of the hereditary peers, some 650 of them, a little bit more, I think. But a political compromise allowed for the retention of 92 hereditaries who were elected by their fellows, fellow hereditary peers, and replaced by means of a by-election when one of them sadly dies or retires. This fudge has a complicated history, but was intended to remain until so-called full reform of the House, meaning moving towards an elected chamber, was agreed. However, the principle could and should be ended today by a simple law to stop the by-elections. As things stand at the moment, the government fairly often loses votes in the Lords. Although these changes can be reversed in the Commons, the government, as you all know, does not have a generous working majority, and so ministers quite understandably fear losing their legislation. One way of counteracting this would be to appoint a further 40 to 50 loyal Tory peers, moving the government closer to a political majority and thereby helping to ensure that its legislation gets through. This is not just a problem under this government, I might add. The Labour government appointed hundreds of new peers during their period in office from 1997 to 2010. There is nothing to stop the Prime Minister of the day, again of whatever political party, doing just this. In fact, there are constant rumours that a new list is being drawn up to be announced at a not too politically sensitive time. While everyone accepts that the House of Lords needs refreshing and that new members bring new ideas and a liveliness to the House, especially the younger ones, we need to have agreement on what a modern, effective revising chamber should look like, and equally agreement on how we arrive at that happy position. This, unfortunately, could take 100 years. There have been perhaps 4 or 5 attempts at full-scale reform of the composition of the Lords in the last 15 years. Each one has been defeated, not always in the Lords, but in the Commons too, where MPs may perceive a democratically elected House of Lords as a threat to their own influence. What has been a great deal more successful in terms of reform is incremental change. Thus, in the last 10 years, we've managed to introduce retirement, voluntary as yet, but gaining momentum, suspensions, and even expulsion for repeated non-attendance or gross misbehaviour, of which I have to say there have been occasions. This may seem very tame, but I have to tell you it is a seismic shift. Nevertheless, we still have a long way to go. The House of Lords is a self-regulating body, which is why my role as the Lord Speaker is so different from that of Mr. Speaker in the House of Commons. The House polices itself. It makes it clear if members transgress the conventions of the Chamber. It decides through various committees how business should proceed and what changes should be introduced. As a self-regulating chamber, I feel it could do a great deal more towards becoming a smaller, tighter, more professional, more effective upper house. At the end of last summer, I convened an informal cross-party group to untangle what we might be able to do to achieve this aim within the boundaries of existing legislation. At all times, we had to bear in mind that radical change was not an option. Peers sit in the House by means of a writ of summons from the monarch, and only primary legislation can alter this. The group therefore proposed principles regarding the House of Lords to which all peers might be able to lend their support, might be willing to lend their support. I hope that these principles, which I'm going to talk about very briefly, will soon be put to the House in the form of a resolution and voted on to serve as a basis for any number of smaller private members' bite-sized bills, which would be the mechanisms by which the principles were implemented. So we arrived at the following principles: that at all times the Lord should be no larger than the House of Commons, thus introducing for the first time in history a cap on the size of the revising chamber. That there should at no time be a political majority in the House of Lords. No one party should have a political majority. That at all times 20% of peers should be crossbenchers or independents with no party affiliation. That there should be an appropriate party balance in the House, perhaps reflecting the average votes cast in the last 2 or 3 elections. There is inevitably resistance to a programme of principles because it is seen as a means of limiting the Prime Minister's patronage to appoint peers, which is a very potent power. However, what is the alternative to a small, well-thought-through, incremental changes to tackle the major problems that the House itself acknowledges? My friends, the alternative is an unwieldy, ever-growing House with increasing party political representation, looking inwards rather than outwards, and above all, failing to hold the government of the day properly to account. My job as Lord Speaker has in large part been to promote and protect the reputation of the House. I do believe that the time has come for a self-regulating House to regulate in order to regain a reputation for reasoned, independent and robust scrutiny of laws that affect us and our families and our livelihoods. Thank you.
Right. I've got the results of the resolution on avoid food waste and address food poverty. The number of votes in favour is 5,146 and the number against is 1,080. So that an 82.7% majority, so the resolution was carried. Thank you. Right. It's nearly finished. I promise I won't take too much longer. Right, as we move toward our 101st birthday in September and the beginning of the second century for the WI movement, what are the challenges ahead and where will the future take us? Well, oh, for a crystal ball is all I can say. But what makes the WI so special? As I said earlier, we are not a ladies' group. We are a group of ladies who belong to a very robust organisation. And as Julia has said, the NFWI is in good and secure position financially. What makes the WI different? From the very early days, members have been developing their skills in public speaking and leading a meeting, as well as many traditional skills. And as women working together, we have a collective voice. Women influencing society and women's roles in society. One person can make a difference. As a WI member, we can make a difference, for example, by putting forward a resolution. The WI is a set of rules which forms the structure of the organisation and is a skeleton in which we operate, though these might sometimes appear to be unnecessary and perhaps even petty. They have kept the WI stable and functional for 100 years. As I'm sure you all know, the WI is made up of 3 tiers, and the Constitution gives us a clear structure on all 3 levels of the WI. It sets the boundaries that makes us one organisation. The Constitution also gives the WI its purpose, its charitable objects, and allows every federation and WI to be unique and individual. However, with this individuality does come responsibility. Each WI must abide by charity law. We are all volunteers doing our best at whatever level we may be supporting the organisation, and we need to respect each other and value each other's diversity. Women have changed over the last 100 years. We are better educated, we have the right to vote and play a prominent part in society. And you only have to have listened to the 2 speakers we've had today that shows what women can achieve. The WI is there for any woman, and the diversity of the membership makes the WI what it is today and how it has progressed since 1915. Women making a difference, all kinds of opportunities for all kinds of women. Just 2 of the straplines that pop into my head. But what about the future? Well, 3 words come to mind, and they all start with T: technology, time, and tradition. We need to think about the future of the WI and not sit back and be complacent. Technology, communication must be the key. Many WIs already use email to communicate between meetings and use web pages, Facebook, and Twitter. One of the best tools for communication is the WI website. Every WI has a page on the website to share their meeting details and much more if they wish, and there's no cost to the WI for this. Social media is now a key element in everyday communication and a great way to promote the WI to a very much wider audience. It is often the first point of contact for potential members and the media. Social media sites are free and can be used for sharing information and images. There are also guidelines for WIs on how to use these on the WI Moodle. The WI Moodle is an online educational resource used by many organisations, and we have adapted the software as a learning site for the WI. WI members can access all kinds of educational documents, training information and courses available via the WI Moodle from the comfort of their own home at any time. You will find specific areas for certain posts such as MCS reps, WI treasurers, WI advisors or judges, and many of these have their own interactive forum. When I came onto the NFWI board, the NFWI had no means of contacting individual members. There was no list of names. Only WIs knew who their members were, and federations probably only knew who those members who had a position within the federation, for example, an advisor or a cookery judge. And in 2006, the board asked every member to submit their names and addresses to enable easier and quicker communication between the members, federations, and the NFWI. We now have, as I said, 226,402 members on the MCS. Some of them with email addresses and telephone numbers, and ideally we would like an email address for everyone, please, and for it to be kept updated. If you're not on the system, then you won't get your copy of WI Life. And WI Life is a key method of communication with members, and the magazine regularly contains vital information for you. I would like to stress that the NFWI has been strictly compliant with Data Protection Act, and members' details are never sold. So please let us know your email address to ensure that we can keep you updated and let you know about your special interest area. We have dedicated April and September as MCS months. So what does that mean? Actually, we'd like you to update the information, please. You've all got an MCS rep in your WI or your federation, so please keep the information updated. Although technology is the future, we are moving with the times, and we should also use all methods of communications. And let's not forget the members with no internet access. We know we can supply you with hard copy, but you know what works best for you. The NFWI Communications team is always happy to advise, and guidelines are available on PR, website, and social media. Now for the future, coming soon. This year, the NFWI is working with our website agency Squiz to develop a dedicated members-only section on the WI website. Think of this as an added benefit as part of your membership subscription. Not delivered to your door like WI Life, but online information source. The content will be easy to access, and there'll be exclusive resources that showcase everything on offer to the members of the NFWI. These will include various projects, and like the ones I was referring to this morning. It will be a new way for the NFWI to communicate and engage directly with WI members, and it can also be used by federations. We must use technology to our advantage as we plan for the future. The website will continue to be the first port of call for information and new members' inquiries. The WI Moodle will continue as a training platform as it was for its original purpose. And the members-only area on the WI website will be designed especially for you as a WI member, and will enhance your membership by making all kinds of learning opportunities available through the website. Now, the second T of the three is time. And more members are working, and as retirement age increases, and we're all going to be working longer, the NFWI, federations and WIs need to consider the amount of time spent at meetings. Does the WI committee have to be on the same day every month? Does it have to be on the second Tuesday afternoon at the President's house? Do we need to change the way we communicate with each other? Being a WI officer or a committee member or a federation trustee is a commitment that should be possible to be undertaken by all members. Anyone who would like to do it, not just those who are free on a specific day. Meetings need not be set in stone. Flexibility is the key word. We are trying and testing alternative ways of communicating as board members, Skype, teleconferencing, and discussing how we can have shorter meetings. We have cut down on the paper usage by using email, memory sticks, and iPads. But I think we've got to think is that the NFWI board, their meetings are over 2 days, and board members are also on at least 2 subcommittees. And if you're an NFWI officer, then the board meetings are 3 days, 5 times a year. And basically, that's the tip of the iceberg. But that is also what's happening in federations and WIs on a lesser scale. We realise that we need to look at how we can make changes to all levels, including NFWI, so that working members have an equal opportunity to play an active part in the governance of the WI. Even though I probably have the best job in the world, and I think my feet think I've got the best job in the world at the moment, it's a 24/7 job almost. It's unpaid, I'm a volunteer, but I did say yes. We have tradition. Well, you all said yes too. If you hadn't said yes, you wouldn't be here today, would you? No. No, so Teresa, let's not forget what we really are about. Learning new skills, sharing our experiences with others, and last but not least, the fun and the friendship. Do you remember the 3 key messages? The WI is here to inspire you, the WI is everything that you want it to be, and the WI is what you make of it. The WI needs good leadership. This is the future. WI members are the WI. We all shape the organisation, and its future is dependent on all of us. The WI needs responsible leadership, and the Constitution is there to guide us. With this in mind, the board, wanting to know as much as they can about you to give, so that we can give the members what they want, and as an organisation, we will be asking you to fill in a census form, which will be available both online and in WI Life. So what I'm saying is, please fill in the census to help the NFWI Board of Trustees inspire you and make the WI everything that you want it to be. Thank you. Right. Oh, I don't think it could have gone unnoticed that today is Her Majesty the Queen's official birthday. Not everyone gets to celebrate their birthday twice, not even at 90. But before we end the meeting with our celebration, no cake today, I would like to say thank you to you all for coming to the meeting, and to the Brighton Bells for their tour and treasure hunt last night. I think sure the viewers of you who went had a really good time. It was very nice of them. I think we could class it as a fringe event. I'd like to thank also the NFWI staff, who have been working closely with the staff of the Brighton Centre, and I know spend a great deal of time making all this come together, and have been here today to help and assist us all. To Jana, Kerry and Fiona for making sure that I have all the papers in the right order, and to all the trustees for their friendship and unfailing support during the last year when I needed it most. Tonight, we can relax before the special board meeting tomorrow, but as they say, tomorrow is another day.
Hello, Brighton. It's supposed to be Wembley, isn't it, really? But we are going to be marking the birthday of a WI member who's officially 90 today, the president of Sandringham WI. And so the first thing we're going to do is sing happy birthday to her.